Chrono Odyssey. This is one of the handful of upcoming MMOs that we've been keeping an eye on over the past couple of years, which is just kind of the nature of this genre. There's so few new ones being developed and they all take forever to make, which means, yeah, we're talking about the same list of games more or less year in and year out. Anyway, the last time we discussed Chrono Odyssey was back in June following an early playtest, which was met with mixed, leaning negative reception online. As covered at the time, I did enjoy things about the game for sure, but I disliked many others, unfortunately, and thought it could benefit from just having a lot more time in development, ideally getting quite a few changes and improvements prior to releasing during what was their originally planned window of late 2025, which is fast approaching if not you consider it already being here. In fact, at the end of that video, I said, as for their projected 2025 Q4 release, I don't know, man, like unless this most recent build is leagues better than what we played this weekend, there's no way. Well, I come now from the future with some good news. If you hadn't already heard, it looks like all of it is happening. The developer has come out and announced plans to massively overhaul the game, which they say should be addressing many of the issues the community expressed during testing, along with plenty of others, as we'll get into. And the release date has, while not officially announced through public channels, it has been pushed back. We discovered through a earnings call by an entire year and is now planned to launch sometime in late 2026. Now, as a quick refresher, after playing the prior test, my overall thoughts in the game were, I liked the classic MMO structure. The game had a big open world. You got players running around all over the place, points of interest full of enemies, mini bosses, and side quests. There's a lot of different solo and group content, tons of world bosses, and a lot of secrets to discover in the world, which I liked. Just the overall structure of the game, I thought it was pretty good. I also thought combat didn't feel too bad, like decent feedback on the attacks. It certainly isn't the best, most polished action MMO combat, but it also wasn't the worst. Again, like I had a nice enough time running around attacking things in the game. It had a good enough feel, but certainly had room for improvement. There was also a fair bit of content variety beyond all the typical MMO activities, running around doing kill and fetch quests, gathering resources, and farming enemies. They also had some interesting activities to mix things up, like as mentioned, all sorts of world bosses, but they also had these really cool trials, which were like a mix of brain teasers with some combat and jumping puzzles. Like I really enjoyed these actually. So here's another trial. These have thus far for me basically been like obstacle courses, although I do believe some of them are more boss fighty. Son of... Did you just play a trick on me? This is cool as hell. So far, this is the third trial that I've seen. I genuinely really like it. This isn't like a MMO dungeon where you're clearing ads and then bosses. It's more obstacle coursey with some enemies in between, but I do like that. Like I really do. Despite some washed out visuals and terrible lighting, I actually did enjoy the game's setting and environment. It had this like cool dark medieval fantasy tone. I just wish it all looked better. And then lastly, the game kind of had like this old school MMO feel. It felt very almost nostalgic to me at times, which I did appreciate. So those were the things that I liked, but the list of things I disliked were longer and much more severe. For starters, technically the game was just a complete disaster. Like it both looked and ran like crap. I saw lots of game-breaking bugs. Oh, I'm swimming in the mountain. There were tons of glitchy animations. An insane level of pop-in. Look at that mountain range back there. And the lighting was just horrendous. How come the lighting looks wonky everywhere? Because the lighting looks wonky everywhere. Your level of perception is in tune with what I'm experiencing as well. Maybe the worst that I've ever seen. I don't even know how it's possible for a game to look this bad, but I just couldn't believe it. And then on top of all that, performance was pretty bad for the most part. Now, I eventually got the game to run smoothly, but that required lowering the resolution scale to 50%. Which just, it's not good. And that's with me having an RTX 4090, an i9 14900K, and 64 gigs of RAM. So like the game just, it was a complete mess. Also, like just to point out here, the game that we played during that beta looked completely different from the gameplay trailers that they had previously released. Now, this isn't an unheard of thing in the games industry, but it was especially egregious here. They looked like completely different games. It all felt really dated in a lot of ways, like a very static feeling world. Enemy spawns are just kind of stood in place, not even having patrol routes, and what I would consider like non-existent AI. Just like see these wolves like just chilling. Combat was wonky, you know, it had a nice like general feel to it, but there were also a lot of issues that made it pretty rough. For starters, the hitboxes were very unreliable, which made combat frustrating. Enemy movement and attacks felt really glitchy and disjointed. Sound effects needed a bunch of work, and there was no option to turn screen shake off, and holy crap, was the screen shake absolutely over the top. So the IV that I launch out, it ticks. And when it's ticking, my entire screen earthquakes. It's too much, dude. Holy crap, I don't need that. Makes me just not want to use the skill. That's awful, dude. And then lastly, a lot of people pointed out, and I myself observed in the video, a strange number of similarities to New World from various UI elements that look nearly identical. Probably the biggest thing that's like, looks so New World to me is like the inventory system. Like the way they've done this with the little Roman numeral, like just the whole presentation is very New Worldian. To things like the supply chest being incredibly similar, the visual presentation of the gathering and crafting systems. In fact, at one point during testing, a bunch of players managed to find a set of buildings that looked to be one-for-one rip-offs, identical copies of those found in New World, down to having the exact structure, layout, and presentation. Even like the distance and separation between various buildings. There were more things, but that is basically a recap of my thoughts after the last test. So with that said, now let's talk about the new stuff. According to Chrono Odyssey's developer, all of this is going to change. Everything bad about the game is getting fixed, and literally they're just overhauling practically everything. So shortly after the beta test came to a close, they posted a brief recap in which they gave a short little bullet point list of feedback that they received. They said on the positive side, the things that we liked, we thought the world was immersive and worth exploring, that the chronotector system was unique and added depth, which if you didn't play, the chronotector was basically just like you'd go into a location, you'd interact with something, and then the area would change, like going back in time or forward, I don't even remember, but like the area would, it's basically just like area phasing is what it is, but they wrap it in this chronotector labeling. Character customization had a lot of options and room for creativity. Yeah, creativity, that's what you could make ridiculous looking characters. You know, I don't know if giving players the ultimate freedom to make characters however they want is the best idea. Also, the game had a solid core of gameplay with strong potential, and I would kind of agree with that as well. Like that list of positives, I would mostly agree with that. As for things that could be improved, they said performance stability with FPS drops, visual stuttering and optimization, combat feedback and animation polish, clearer quest objectives and map guidance, and more intuitive UI, as well as better PC controller support. And yeah, I would agree with that list along with many others. Now, a few days after that, on July the 4th, they posted a developer notes blog. Here, they outlined some of the things that they had planned for improving the game. Now, in the initial blog, this was the smaller of the two, they specifically highlight here animation and motion, as well as combat improvements, performance and optimization improvements, and then updates to the lighting and graphics in the game. So this was primarily just a list of things that they wanted to outright improve to make the game better. So let's take a look. Under animations and combat responsiveness, they start off with the hit feedback inconsistency, saying that this was a major issue during the test. Some actions felt sluggish or disconnected, with attacks, dodges, and blocks occasionally failing to register as expected. They believe that this was from packet desyncs between the client and server, and they'll be accelerating packet transmission to improve timing accuracy and make hit feedback feel better. And I think the hit feedback was certainly an issue. Also, class weapons. Looks like they're going to be introducing a brand new system called the Matrix to give each weapon a more distinct identity. This is going to allow us to choose from 4 progression paths per weapon, so 12 in total, as each class has 3 weapons available. They also say with this, they aim to diversify skill usage of each weapon based on the progression paths players choose, the goal of which is a wide range of playstyles, even for players who are using the same weapons. We're going to have a lot of different options. They've got some camera fixes. There were like issues that when the camera angle would mess up visibility when you got too close to walls or certain objects, along with some issues that cropped up during using the game's lock-on system. And they also specifically mentioned screen shake, which God, I hope they give me an option to turn screen shake off or at least adjust it because it was so ridiculous. And then controls, they're making some improvements here, redesigning hit reactions by increasing the reaction duration from 1 second to 2 to 4 seconds. This hopefully will provide clearer timing for follow-up attacks and add a greater sense of risk versus reward. So I don't know if this is like hit stop in particular, or like the amount of time someone's locked down after being hit from a strong attack, going from 1 second to anywhere between 2 and upwards of 4 seconds. Quite long. We'll have to see how that feels played in action, but I don't necessarily dislike it. They also said that they are reviewing and fixing unnatural character movements and collision inconsistencies that cause characters to appear as if they were floating. Yeah, there was a disconnect between character movement and the environment, a skatey or floating sort of element to it. On the second area of performance and optimization, they're doing things to make performance and optimization better. They say the GPU and rendering overload, they're going to be restructuring how assets are rendered to reduce GPU load and improve real-time performance. They've got some efficiency improvements. They'll be shifting level design toward reusable environment assets to improve development efficiency and runtime performance. So they're going to hopefully be reducing memory, disk, and rendering overhead, as well as making development easier. You know, reusable assets is a common thing as long as they're like not using the same buildings over and over. But if they're talking about like reusing grass textures and foliage and stuff, that's cool. Like fine by me. I don't really care. Memory usage, they're going to be restructuring the loading system by separating rendering data from collision data to reduce memory usage and overall stability. And then they're just going to be doing some things to improve the game's stability across various system specs, whether you're running high-end, medium, or low-end system. Hopefully the game will be running better. And then finally in graphics, they're just looking to make the graphics look better. This is going to include rendering efficiency, screen transition and quality. They'll be adding DLSS and FSR, which I know is a kind of a hot topic issue. I mean, if the game runs better, great, but people don't want their games to rely on DLSS. Look at Borderlands 4 and the whole controversy around how that game's performance is, basically requiring DLSS to get a smooth frame rate. And then finally, they talk about lighting, which, oh God, I hope the lighting's better because it was just like horrendous. And lighting isn't something that I would normally complain about in games. It's typically like a non-issue, or it's so good that it's worth pointing out. I've rarely ever played a game where the lighting was so bad that it became something that I felt like mentioning, and this was one of those cases. So they're doing a lot here. They said they're working to reduce unnecessary lighting calculations by removing unused lights and limiting excess use of stationary and movable lights. This should lead into performance by not having to like load the light stuff when it's not necessary or when it's far away. But in terms of making it look better, they said they're transitioning to a cluster-based light management system to reduce rendering costs, light overlap, and shading complexity, resulting in more efficient rendering, but also to improve the overall quality of lighting. They're standardizing exposure values and redefining the priority and range of key lights to improve contrast fidelity and maintain consistent exposure across scenes. And this was one of those things where the game constantly looked like it was way overexposed. You know, like sometimes in a game you'll be in a dark cave or a dungeon and then you'll step out into the light and there's this bright overexposure as you first go out. It's like, and then it adjusts. That adjusting just never took place. Like you would just be walking around in town, for example, and it was like super bright, like you barely see what's going on. Like I tried messing with the contrast and just trying to make it not look like this. Something with the lighting in this game is way off. This is like way too overexposed. Like it's fine when it's like that at time. It's just, I think they just have some tuning to do with when and how they use that overexposure. Cause it makes sense in instances like when you're coming out of a dark cave and then it's just like bright white, that's how it's supposed to be. But I don't know why it's this overexposed where I'm just like chilling in town. See what I mean? There's something wrong here. This is probably how it should more look like. But then all of a sudden it's like, what? I can't, I'm looking into the sun. What's happening? So yeah, I'm glad just lighting looks horrible, so I'm glad they're making it better. So yeah, they're going to be doing some things to make combat feel and look better. They'll be improving the game's performance and optimization and trying to make the game look better across the board. So that was the first blog post. But then came part two. These dev notes came a few weeks later on July 29th, and this one was an absolute honker. Here they outline changes planned for just about everything. Combat systems, content in the open world, progression and gameplay flexibility, technical stability, art design and animations, the UI and UX, game balance, social features, in-game guidance, sound, as well as the game's narrative. That is the game. That list is the entire game. They're like changing aspects of just about every element of this game. This unit of a post is absolutely colossal and breaks down every above category into further subsections in which they first outline issues with whatever the topic is, followed by solutions that they have and plans to fix it. Now, I am not going to read all of this verbatim. That would probably take over an hour and a half, but I do want to go through and highlight some of the main points and most interesting things that I saw. Now, the first two sections, the combat systems as well as the content in the open world, these were like the chunkiest areas. So they're going to be making changes in the combat system to the controls. They'll be improving hit feedback, damage feedback, skill changes, class changes, improvements to weapon swapping. They're going to be doing balance. They'll be fixing camera and FOV issues, improving enemy AI, ramping up the difficulty, and then they had some adjustments to PvP. That was specifically talking about like the dueling in the game. But let me just give you an example. So the very first section, controls under the combat system. So they first list the issues. They say issues with the input responsiveness include long recovery frames made it difficult to input new commands during ongoing animations. Certain motions remained unresponsive even after visual completion. Weapon swapping and other combat systems suffered from input buffering, resulting in delayed response. Some content felt sluggish due to latency issues, and UI interactions lacked clear visual feedback, making it hard to confirm whether an input was registered. So that was first their list of like issues when it pertained to input responsiveness under the controls category. And then their plan for each of those included they'll be adjusting the interruption timing for movement, attack, and skill animations to improve responsiveness, buffering the window for inputs to be significantly reduced to prevent unintended actions from being triggered. Colors and effects across all interactions will be adjusted, and unified UI kit will be introduced to improve clarity and visual feedback. The system level feedback queue will be added when players attempt to cancel out a non-interruptible action. And to further improve input responsiveness, we'll be reviewing client-server packet transmission and input optimizing network performance. And that category of bullet points of like issues and then their plan for it is in every category and then every subsection underneath those categories. Again, this is just number one in the combat system section. This is the controls, and then controls A, input responsiveness. And they've also got similar for controller and keyboard and mouse experience. And then they move on to hit feedback, which is broken down then into another subsection with their issues and plans for improving the game's hit feedback. But yes, generally speaking, they're going to be making the controls feel better. They're going to be making hit feedback and damage feedback better. They're going to be making changes. Let me just take a look at the skills one. They say they'll be introducing some new skill synergies, as skill chaining felt difficult to execute due to a lack of synergy between abilities, and passive skill enhancements were often more efficient, reducing incentive to use active skill combos. So their plan now is that the skill system will be refined to support a wide range of playstyles within the same class or weapon. We talked about the matrix system where they're kind of breaking up the weapons into different kind of playstyles further from there. They're going to be improving the skill descriptions and indicators, some changes to the class balance. As it is right now, all classes basically share similar roles. They have access to tank, healer, and DPS and lack any distinct identity. Range classes are easier to play compared to melee classes. This is like, it can be an ongoing issue. It's like it's easier to kite things than it is to stand toe to toe and take damage directly from them. So you try to mitigate that by, say, increasing the damage so that when you are in a melee range, you can take something down faster so it does less damage to you, versus doing damage from a distance and safely kiting without taking any damage yourself. Or you can increase the tankiness, especially against PvE, of the melee characters so that they can stand toe to toe and trade blows, right? Now, their plans for class balance, they say that monster AI will be improved to ensure more monsters respond effectively to ranged attacks. We'll see how effective. It's like almost always the case in like every RPG or MMO that you have an advantage when you're at range because it's easier to avoid incoming damage. But then they also have that matrix system that they introduced to kind of mix up class variety and have some more distinct identity depending on the stuff that you choose. Weapon swapping is going to be better. There was quite a bit of a delay when it came to weapon swapping in the game. And then there would be the issue of you hitting the input because you'd hit weapon swap, but it wouldn't happen. So maybe you'd hit it again. And then by the time it registered, it would do the weapon swap, but then register the second weapon swap, and then you'd be back to your original weapon. So they've got a bunch of changes to improve it so the weapon swapping is more responsive, and you shouldn't run into the issue of accidentally weapon swapping multiple times and then ending up back to your original weapon when that's not what you intended. Combat depth and pacing should be getting improvements. There'll be improved enemy patterns. They say combat difficulty felt unintentional, highly due to unclear attack telegraphs, making it difficult to time dodges or attacks. This was something that I mentioned in the original video, is that monsters, it was like a really strange, their attack patterns were really unreliable enjoyable, but not in like an interesting way. Like I gotta pay attention. It felt like almost like network lag. Like sometimes they'd be right up on top of you and they'd be staring at you and nothing would happen, and then they would attack, and it wasn't like a regular cadence. It didn't feel like strategic AI trying to throw you off your game. It felt like the game's networking running like crap, and it felt bad. So that this should be getting better. Bunch of improvements to camera as well as FOV. Enemy AI is supposed to be getting improved. That would be nice. They're going to try to smooth out the difficulty of the game. Combat UI and FX changes. So they say that the HUD's going to be redesigned to improve visibility of skill cooldowns and resource indicators. Glow effects will be reduced, and combat visuals will be refined to ensure character motions are more visible, and players will now have the option to toggle combat visuals. I pray that that includes turning off screen shake, at least reducing screen shake. I actually don't want no screen shake because it does add to the feel of a game's combat, like the impact and the feedback when you're hitting things with your abilities. But it was so ridiculous. I can't say it enough. It was so ridiculous. Okay, so that's an overview of the combat systems. The next section includes the content in the open world. They break this down into improvements to the world, regional structure, navigation, interactions, exploration rewards, local quest dungeons, and open world content. So first off, on a world, content density and regional distinction. They say that there was low content density and a lack of regional distinction, which led to underutilized areas and reduced immersion. They're going to be increasing the content density, so there should be more things to do as you're moving throughout the zones. They're also going to make the regions kind of more distinct and have a better visual representation of each of them. They're also adding scenic viewpoints with breathtaking landscapes as players turn corners. I mean, if it's like naturally incorporated, that's cool. I actually like that. Like if you kind of design the world in a way where I'm coming across these vistas, I like that better than like walk up here and hit this eyeball thing and then we show you a vista. No offense to Guild Wars 2 actually, because that's part of the collection system. But anyways, they point out that they had bland and repetitive map designs, so they're going to be looking to change that with some region specific features like swamps, misty forests, wildflower fields, and grasslands that will further enhance and strengthen visual identity, as well as a dynamic grass system being implemented and the wind system to improve and create immersive environmental interactions. That was actually it lacking. That was one of the things that stood out to me in the last test. The game felt really static, and I think that lack of it just felt like things were in place and there wasn't a sense of life in the world. So adding things like a wind system and dynamic grass that flows, that will help alleviate some of the static feeling nature. Regional structure. The game had a disjointed regional transitions and unintuitive pathings. There will be additional routes added to areas that require frequent backtracking, and the in-return feature is going to receive improved guidance and visibility. That's something they said, like, people didn't know that there was a Hearthstone essentially. When it comes to the world map, they say the compass is now going to include altitude indicators using up and down arrows to reflect the location of objectives. The game actually had quite a bit of verticality to it, and for some quest objectives, you actually couldn't tell if you were on like the right plane essentially. Like you were up on a hill, but there was maybe down the hill there would be like a ledge, and then beneath that there would be a cave, and you'd have no clue like where your quest objective was within there. So they're going to do that to help with this, hopefully. More incentivizing of point of interest exploration, introducing hidden caves, narrative encounters, and gathering opportunities of points of interest. Some navigation improvements like traversable and non-traversable terrain. It was difficult for players to distinguish what was climbable and what wasn't, and players often wasted their time trying to climb non-traversable terrain. They now say that non-traversable terrain will feature distinctive visual elements such as rocks and cliffs at least twice the height of the player. So yeah, basically we were running up into invisible walls. There would be like sometimes you could climb an area, and then there are other times in a similar spot that looked like the one that you could climb, you couldn't climb an area, so you'd be running into an invisible wall. Now that wall will be visible. You will see larger rocks and structures blocking your path, so you'll know that you can't go there. There should be better feedback when it comes to various interactions, when you're gathering resources, when you're interacting with objects in the environment. They're also looking to reward exploration a little bit better, so more incentives for going out and exploring and engaging in that stuff. They've got a bunch of plan changes to dungeons in the game. So they said that the current dungeon experience leaned too heavily into combat, whether it was the solo dungeons or party play. While the solo dungeons did receive positive feedback, the overall experience lacked depth and polish. So their plans here, they've got this broken up into multiple sections. So for the expedition dungeons, they'll be introducing randomized gimmicks to make each run feel unique depending on the path that you take, and there will be multiple available. You're going to be encountering different boss bosses, treasure chest, or other events for a more dynamic experience. This will all encourage replayability. Trials, they'll be enhancing the overall atmosphere and layout variety across chambers to make those experiences feel more distinct, as well as a new card system offering buffs and debuffs that introduced strategic roguelike elements to each run. I actually really like that. Then there are the labyrinths. These will include more revival points, allowing players to restart in the middle instead of having to backtrack, which was a nightmare. Also, levers will be replaced with platform-style buttons to keep gameplay flow smooth and uninterrupted. Time portals, each one of these runs will include varied combat setups and new gimmicks to help keep it fresh. And for Chrono Gates, they're going to be supporting replayability by adding new accomplishments and a variety of exclusive rewards. Bunch of improvements coming to open world content as well, large-scale combat visibility. There were difficulties to see what was going on with large-scale combat battles. A lot of players, a lot of effects on screen, hard to tell what was happening. During those field boss fights in particular, skill effects often caused major visibility issues. They're going to be introducing toggle options to allow players to hide other player skills for better visual clarity, as well as certain class skills with disruptive visuals will be adjusted to reduce any clutter from there. And then more reward and loot notifications. So we're going to get some pop-ups for that. Great. Looking forward to it. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We also have an entire section for progression and gameplay flexibility, improvements coming to stats and progression, to the gear system, enhancements and crafting system, gear and skill presets, gathering and crafting. Then there was a section for technical stability, kind of like repeating some of what the original blog post did, but they also dove into more information about improvements and fixes for bugs, the game's performance, and optimization. After that, there was the art design and animation. This was actually funny. They said for the UI design, they said the current UI feels generic and lacks identity. And then the second part of the sentence is coming across too similar to other games. So this is so funny because simultaneously they're saying like, yes, our UI looked a lot like other games. That other game being New World, that's the one that so many people could draw parallel examples to, like, wow, this UI and this setup and the way this is presented looks a whole lot like it does in New World. But the fact that the first half of their sentence said the UI feels generic and lacks identity. Yeah, you could call it generic if you want, but it didn't lack identity. Its identity was the UI of New World. And so they're going to make like a better UI. That's what they said. They're also going to be doing a bunch of improvements to character animations. That was in this section as well. And then finally, there were multiple sections for some game balance issues, social improvements, tutorialization, and making sound better. There was some real chunkiness. I don't know if it was like how it was processed, how it was rendered out, but there were some issues with some of the game sounds for certain effects and abilities, and they're just like deafening sounds like out of nowhere. But anyways, yeah, that's a long list of changes. Literally, like everything that I just recapped here was only scratching the surface. You could be reading this for hours. It's so big. So as of the posting of both of those blog posts, the game was still scheduled to release in late 2025. Obviously, that ain't happening. Now, nowhere in either of those posts or any follow-up posts, there hasn't been one, has any official delay been announced. They haven't like officially come out on a Chrono Odyssey social feed and said, hey, we've delayed the game. But there is a delay, and we know this because of Kakao Games. During Kakao Games' second quarter 2025 earnings call, they told investors the Chrono Odyssey was delayed and would now be targeting a Q4 2026 release. Now, between now and then, what they'll be doing is addressing community feedback and making changes to the long list of things that we overviewed and discussed, and a whole lot more that I didn't even have time to mention in this video. I gotta say, I am so glad they're listening to feedback. The game clearly needed a lot of work. There were things about it that I enjoyed, and I hope they can keep those things, improve them, and then fix everything else that was wrong with the game, because it was a long, long list. I mean, it certainly sounds like they have a game plan. In fact, the game plan is so big and so thorough that I don't even know how realistic it is that they release in the end of next year. They're touching on like every core aspect of the game, overhauling the combat system, class identity, how that all works, bunch of changes to the content in the open world, the progression and the gameplay flexibility, that in addition to technical performances and the UI overhaul, changes to the user experience. Like, they're changing the game. The game is turning into another game practically, it sounds like. It's like wow, I can't wait. Next year, I know they're going to be running some other tests prior to release. That's going to happen for certain. And I cannot wait to see what we're looking at when we play that. Is it going to be as different as it sounds like it's going to be? I kind of hope so, but also, yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. The game certainly wasn't ready. It needed a lot of improvements. That is a list of a lot of improvements. We will see in 2026. Can't wait, honestly, one way or another. I cannot wait to see how this thing turns out. That's it for today, though. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Yeah, they listen to our feedback, everybody, and they're changing it. This is what we're asking for. We'll see what we get as a result. Thanks for watching, as always. Appreciate you, and I'll see you next time, all right? Take it easy.